So everyone is always saying that Spider-Man freshman year is doomed before it's even started. That if it's not a prequel to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, then it's really pointless. And to some extent, I do get that, but also at the same time, I believe this will be a massive benefit for the show. Let me tell you why. But before we get into that, if you guys are new to the channel, then I want to urge you all to subscribe, join the best Spider-Man community in the entire world. We're trying to push to 30,000 subscribers. Let's try and reach that goal. But with that being said, let's get straight into this. So first, before we talk about why your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would be much better without the influence of the sacred timeline, aka the Marvel Cinematic Universe, let's back this up with some pre-context. Why does everyone even think that this show will be in the MCU in the first place? And why are people now disappointed that it isn't? Well, some of you may have forgotten, but when your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man was first announced, or as it was called back then, Spider-Man freshman year, it was announced to be a part of the MCU and was actually going to be a prequel to Captain America Civil War, following Tom Holland's Spider-Man up until that point in the MCU's timeline. It was confirmed that the show would tackle the origin of Spider-Man and how he got bitten by the spider. So people from this point on assumed that this show would be in the actual MCU, detailing the origin for this version of the character. This made a lot of people happy for one major reason. Fans of Spider-Man up until this point have been criticizing the MCU Spider-Man for being too closely tied to Tony Stark and replacing Uncle Ben, who is a significant part of Peter's life. However, Spider-Man freshman year looked to rectify this issue. If this was an origin story about the MCU version of Spider-Man, it could include Uncle Ben and fix all of the issues that everyone had had with the MCU Spider-Man up until this point. This was one of the main reasons as to why fans were so excited about this being in the MCU. It potentially could fix Tom Holland's Spider-Man in a lot of people's eyes. Not only that, this show would give the chance to MCU Spider-Man to stand on his own 2 feet and give him more of an individual identity, adding depth to the backdrop of the character that we didn't actually have. In layman's terms, people were excited because this was going to expand upon and potentially fix problems that people had with the already existing character. However, things started to change. As more information was revealed about the show, it became very clear that it was actually kind of impossible for this to be a part of the mainline MCU. Norman Osborn was then confirmed to be an overarching character in the show, when Peter hadn't even met Norman until No Way Home. And even then, Norman in No Way Home was that of Tobey Maguire's Norman Osborn. Next, Peter's classmates were not the same as they were in the MCU. We had parallels like Lonnie Lincoln for Flash Thompson, possibly Nico Minoru for the best friend or potential love interest like Ned or MJ, but not the actual characters from the MCU movies themselves. Not only that, the villains made things even more confusing. Doc Ock, Scorpion, Rhino. How come none of these have even ever been mentioned or referenced in the MCU since? Fans started to question what this show was really about. Was this actually in the MCU? Of course, you had wild theories about timeline changes, No Way Home, multiversal stuff, but at the end of the day, I think it was very clear that this show just wasn't a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And the reason everyone had become excited about it had just been diminished in one fell swoop. After fans started to question what the show actually was, it was eventually confirmed that Marvel had twisted their words slightly, and this show wouldn't actually be a part of the sacred timeline of the MCU, but rather a what-if style scenario where it was Norman Osborn that approached Peter instead of Tony Stark during the events of Captain America Civil War. So technically, this universe is still in the MCU, except Spider-Man and his surrounding characters are now different. So this show was working off a technicality this entire time. And this really upset people, because as I mentioned, fans had come to the conclusion that this show was going to mean something in the actual Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was going to have leverage to the story. It was going to impact the way that we viewed Tom Holland's character, and like I mentioned, in some fans' eyes, potentially even fix him. But this simply just wasn't the case. Therefore, people started questioning, why does this show even matter? Some fans even said that they boycott the entire show completely. However, with all this negativity surrounding your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, I'm here to explain to you why it's actually better for the show that it's nowhere near the sacred timeline or the actual Marvel Cinematic Universe, and why it's better for the show as a whole and for Spider-Man that it's completely separate. And it's quite simple, really. It's one sentence, 4 words. It isn't tied down. To rebuttal people's opinions about the show, I'll say this. One issue that I have and many others have with the MCU is how much it dictates the creative freedom of some of the films and shows. A big example are the cameos. Everyone complains that cameos and fan service dictate the MCU nowadays, and fans explain this is because they're more obsessed with shoving the fact that it's a part of a larger universe down our throats more than anything else. Most fans agree that they'd rather have a solo, well-written, well-shot story of individual characters that matter to the overall story, rather than a cameo-infested fan service bunch of absolute nonsense. Only then, if you add well-written characters and well-detailed stories, would the overlaps, crossovers, and cameos actually mean something. Rather, the MCU has been going in a direction where they're prioritizing the cameos over actual storytelling beats. And I think everyone can agree this has been a major problem with the MCU, especially in phases 4 and 5. Well, in my opinion, the same applies to your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. The fact that this show isn't a part of the MCU gives it total creative freedom to do whatever the hell it wants. It can introduce any villain it wants. It can introduce any side character it wants. And it isn't confined by the fact that the MCU exists around it. I think that's far more interesting for a Spider-Man show than a prequel to Civil War. Just think about it. This is the first ever high production, creatively free, 100% Marvel handled Spider-Man show that we've ever gotten. And they're delivering it to us in a world inspired by the MCU, but one where it can use whatever story or characters that it wants. Doesn't that sound cool? That sounds really cool to me. Like, for example, if the show was in the MCU, it would be dictated by the fact that it can't use characters like the Vulture, the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, the Lizard, the Sandman, Mary Jane. It couldn't use Ned. It probably couldn't use Harry Osborn either. It couldn't use any of these characters because these are all characters that are eventually tied to other characters that are going to show up down the line. Not only that, Peter wouldn't be able to make new suits. He couldn't meet the Avengers. He couldn't meet Kingpin. He couldn't date Liz or even have a relationship that goes any further than acquaintances with MJ. Meet new characters. Like, what could Peter do in this series if it was actually in the MCU? Probably nothing. I think we should all have a little bit of positivity about this. We also have to remember this is the same team that made X-Men 97, and that was absolutely awesome. Freshman year doesn't need the MCU, and that's a good thing, because it means it can do its own thing, which is what we all want, right? We want this show to be good. We want it to be creatively free. That's exactly what it is doing. Here you can watch my breakdown of everything that we saw at D23 for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, so make sure to go and watch that video. If you like my content and want to support upcoming videos, consider becoming a member and clicking the join button down below for all kinds of perks. Thank you all to the current members, you guys are absolutely awesome, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, and peace.